This is Black Market Leadership, the underground resource for disruptors and status quo breakers.
Welcome back to another episode of Black Market Leadership. Oh boy, exciting. Today we have Jim Hotaling. Say hello, Jim.
Hey, Kevin, how you doing? Excited to be on the podcast today. You and I have known each other for a while now, and I'm pretty excited to have a conversation again today with you.
I got to tell you, our last podcast, when you interviewed me, I got some really great feedback. And for the audience here, the podcast Iron Sharpens Iron. Boy, you got some great guests. I think your last guest, did they sell a company for $1 billion? Was that right?
They did. So that's pretty awesome. They're called the Unicorns. They're the first husband and wife to ever become billionaires together as business owners. They're from Slovenia, and I had never heard of it. Maybe I'm just an old guy, Kevin. I don't know. But there was this app called Talking Tom, and it's a cat. It's a little cat that talks back. It sounds like a helium voice. And they created this app, and that's actually what started their interest. But they put in less than $200,000 US in seed money in this company 7 years ago, and they exited it at $1 billion at the beginning of the year. Crazy. But they're fantastic people. Isa and Samo, Logan. The secret to them, and one of the things that even what we talked about, a lot of this comes down to human-centric leading and all of that. And they're just huge believers in it. And now they're billionaires.
Not too shabby.
Not too bad.
Yeah. So for the audience, let me just Jim, go by Jim. So Jim currently serves as the head of leadership development and assessment at Into Growth. Jim has a great history of being highly successful in environments which demand crisis management, problem-solving skills, organizational development, team building, and uncompromising integrity. I tell you, Jim's just got a great background. 30 years of is it Air Force? Is that correct?
Air Force. Yep.
So 30 years of leadership, management, operational contingency experience in government and private sectors. And you have experience with special forces, secret squirrel kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. Everybody knows about it all now, but within my 30 years, the first 20, I was an Air Force combat controller, which is special tactics, special operation forces that we went out with the Navy and the Army and coalition forces and all of those things. So for 20 years, I got to jump out of airplanes and dive and shoot and blow up things and be, around some of the most stellar people in the world. And it was fantastic. I tell people I never worked a day in my life until after I retired out of the service.
So something tells me in that 30 years, you've experienced different types of leaders.
Oh, you bet. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. With an institution like the Air Force, and then being a special, working with along special operations, there's different mindsets, different kinds of people. So I bring this up for the audience because weeks ago when Jim and I were talking about doing this podcast, like what kind of subject could we do that could be very interesting, maybe ruffle some feathers. Yeah. Jim likes to ruffle feathers. So do I. So we said, how about the topic of modern leadership development? That should be an interesting topic. So we agreed on that, and we have no rules, no script. So look, how do we do this? Where do we start with this, Jim? The state of modern leadership development. Where do we start?
Well, I think the first thing from my point of view, and now it's getting backed up by study after study, is modern leadership development. If we look back at the last 20 years of it, never worked. It doesn't work. It's broken. Has it produced the next level of leader that we were promised 20 years ago? Answer is no.
Yeah, there's
not
a lot
developmental programs.
Yeah, there's a lot of literature, and I know last time you and I spoke, I think you quoted, was it Deloitte or the McKinsey? It
was Deloitte or DDI. It was some think tank. I can't quite remember. And they actually did a very thorough, it was a great study. They did a backwards look at 20 years of how much money was spent by organizations, both public and private, on leadership development programs, and what was the ROI on it? And you really can't justify the amount of money that was spent on trying to create next generation leaders and actually seeing a difference, moving the needle in productivity, and taking it to the next level, with revenue generation, all those kind of things. It really isn't there. It was disproportionately non-eventful.
Yeah. In my experience, and I know you've seen it too, if I could say the first thing that comes to mind with the state of modern leadership development, first of all, what's the reception to it? And
Yeah.
I've seen I personally have seen two receptions. One is that's just, that's a check the box kind of thing, blah, blah, blah. Just fine, we'll do it. And, it's just off the shelf. You do it and you're done.
Yep.
And the other is, I just think people, they just don't have, there's really no time. I think there's no time to do it. There's really no interest in doing it at all. It's just like, well, that's fancy stuff. We're real world here. That's been my experience. What about you?
Yeah, I think, the check the box people, the problem with that is, and these studies actually showed it too, and I think we've all experienced it. The people that are deciding who to send to the leadership development programs, they weren't necessarily leaders in their own right. And they may have been either bad leaders to begin with. So their whole frame of thinking was just like, well, I'll take Sally or John or Tommy or Sue, just go do it. So, the boss was just checking the box too. Or if it's a CHRO or chief of learning or any of that, were they in enough leadership positions to really send the right people and all of that? So I think the check the box is this one thing that really is happening all the time, and it's just dysfunctional. The other thing about people saying, hey, I'm in the real world and I don't need no theory and I'm too busy for it and all of that, I think has a lot of validity too, Kevin. I really do. But the issue is it's because of the coursework, the curriculum, all of those things, they weren't aligned to inspire you. If you're just doing something to do it, or if, hey, let's play card games to find out what type of person you are and all of that. If it doesn't, connect to the person and they can't see how this would be of value in their real world work situation, they're not going to get into it.
Yeah. It's really tough. For some organizations, it's very tough to even to connect leadership with numbers, with the hard sciences. I think, be frank with you, a lot of leadership development today is just synonymous with fluff. It's the feel good stuff. And, it's funny, when I told a friend of mine, this VP sent me this email. I told him about this conversation. He sent this to me. This is from Tom Peters, and he's got a quote here. The quote is, hire for all jobs based on empathy. Employ people who care about people. Everything else can be trained. And the VP said, look at this trash. And now half of people out there are very mission oriented. They would say, this is just fluff. I'm not spending time and resources going through this feel good stuff. But the other half out there, like, absolutely right. You have to have empathy. You have to be able to deal with people. So there's a big disconnect, I find. And what you and I discussed was, especially in our experience as the military, you have two pillars, mission and people. And it seems to me that modern leadership development is all people. It's exclusively people. And when you have stuff like this, it just seems like fluff. I'm not going to invest time and money into it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, Kevin. That was my biggest takeaway from our podcast was you were very controversial in the way of saying, oh, it's just not bubbles and rainbows, like the whole missing ingredients is just about, you don't understand people and it's all about EQ, but the realities are that's not true, and you were able to shove it in everybody's face to go, hey, look, examine the two pillars. Absolutely. Is there something about human-centric leading and the power of people and having EQ? You bet. But don't forget about what's making the money, what's moving things forward, what the real purpose of this organization is about. A real purpose of any for-profit organization, say, isn't about getting a whole bunch of people in a brick and mortar building just to socialize. That's not what they're there for. They're there to build a product, do something better, make money, all of those kind of things. And you only accomplish that by understanding what the mission is.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you got to have that real appreciation for the mission. We talk about the hard numbers and the hard science. Yeah, there are different ways you can measure leaders. This engagement numbers. Are your people in your team actively giving you new ideas for innovation? Are you constantly improving processes? Are you streamlining processes? What's your retention? What is attrition levels? When I talk, culture again has one of those terms where it sounds fluffy, but if you study military history, you see culture can be a strategic weapon because you want people. You and I know about this thing called the fog of war, friction. It affects all of us. But one of the things as a commander of someone in the military who's leading troops, you have to trust them that when the fog of war comes, when they are out of your sight, that they will be doing their mission and even taking care of mission and task, which maybe not are not assigned to them, but are necessary. You have to have that kind of know-how and knowledge that they have to have that kind of reliability, and
Yeah.
that's a real. Those are some real, to me, some real metrics for developing leaders. And I don't mean just taskmasters, but can you develop people to act on their own, to plan, to strategize, to write out plans, to communicate in a way which is efficient. It doesn't cost us. There's no waste. There's minimum overlap, and you can
Yep.
continue to develop over and over.
Yeah, it's interesting because the only way you get people doing that though is you do have to have a high level of trust, but you have to also be able to push people and to delegate and to do those kind of things. If you're asking for those people to think differently and have engagement and all that stuff, they've got to be interacting and they've got to have this high level of trust. And you see it in the cancel culture that's happening now, and you see it in political correctness and all that stuff. It paralyzes people. If you have an organization where everybody's just looking over their shoulder and worried about what everybody thinks about what they're going to say and stuff, you'll never achieve what you're kind of indicating is some of those measures of success because they're not empowered. And that's everybody that's not empowered. They're not going to critically think. They're not going to engage. They're not going to care. They're just going to check in and check out. And so there's like all these underlying cultural things that have to happen so that you can use these real matrices to show, is there really something happening out there or not?
Yeah, we said earlier about the two pillars, the mission and people. Well, even in mission, you have people who are very big picture, and you'll find that usually these big picture people will delegate. So oftentimes they'll delegate. I mean, there's different factors involved there, but I'm totally generalizing. The big
Sure.
picture, people usually will delegate, but you have other people who are, even though they're mission oriented, they're very task exclusive. They're about
Yeah.
quality and accuracy. And when you say delegate to them, like, no, I'm not delegating anything. That thing has to be 100% quality. I can do that.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so that's where this nuance comes into, I think, leadership development. And I don't hear it a lot of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting. There is a pretty cool balance when you talk about, like the quality mindset. It's got to be right, and for it to be right, I need to be like right in the weeds all the time. It's like analysis paralysis, and it's like the perfectionist and all of those kind of generalized terms when you talk about people, and it's very dangerous. It's kind of interesting sometimes when we're like, oh, we're going to build the best team. And sometimes when you're chasing somebody that is a perfectionist, that is dangerous in itself, right? You don't want somebody that's such a perfectionist, such into the quality that it's got to be perfect, perfect, perfect. He'll paralyze the entire team.
No, I agree. But this is really where leadership development comes in. And the one thing that I've always talked about is a concept called adaptability. And that means being able to adjust to your environments. I have worked with a lot of quality assurance teams where, you take a 10-person team of managers and directors, 90% of them are all we'll call high conformist, detail oriented. You give them 3 hours, they will spend 2 hours and 59 minutes planning and preparing. But what happens is
Right.
you have to develop them, say, hey, you can't do that. You got to spend a minimal time planning, then rehearsing and getting ready to launch launch this initiative. And that's where the real leadership development comes in, because some people out there are quality, are about accuracy. Good. We need them. We
That's
also
right.
need them to
That's right.
adjust to hit those deadlines. Then you have people like you and I think, who are big picture, fast paced through real development. Slow down some.
Yeah.
Kevin, you hit 3 points, you missed one. Unacceptable. So you got to kind of meet in the middle and really adjust to your environment. But again, when you talk about modern leadership development, I'm just hearing, Jim, let's hold hands. You're special. I'm special. How do we become the best team in the world? I don't hear the meat and bone, the real, the real return on investment in that. And if I'm investing my money and time in an organization, I want to know that this venture is going to be a success.
I agree, Kevin. And I think a lot of the leadership development programs that are out there, and when we're kind of picking on the human side of this pillars that we're talking about right now, really do center on the just me kind of things, right? Like looking in the mirror, understanding me. There's a lot of value to that. A lot. Matter of fact, there's a lot that I do in my own executive coaching that you got to understand yourself before we can start fixing anything else. But where most programs don't focus on from a leader's perspective is showing a leader how to recognize what a high performing organization is, how to go after where are the discussions to say you do need that quality person, but you can't have an entire quality team. You need the yin to the yang.
Yes.
You need the big dreamer, but you don't want a team full of nothing but dreamers. Like how do you create the ultimate teams, and how do you recognize them, and how do you become the orchestrator to this beautiful symphony of teammates to get the real thing accomplished? I don't see a lot of that. And again, because it's centered on mission accomplishment, right? It's almost like the dirty word, okay, yep, be a good leader, but where's the talk of, in order to do the mission, in order to accomplish the mission, you need to be you've got to be the conductor to this symphony. And we're going to really concentrate on that because it's about the mission. And you don't hear that very often.
No, I totally agree. And I would add another element that I see a lot. Strategy is a term that's it's used so often, and I feel like it's lost some of its real value because it's just tossed around almost. And you'll see where I'm going with this. In the military, for the audience out there, there's really what we call 3 levels of operations. Really, 3 levels of doing things. At the very bottom is the tactical level. That's the guys and gals in the trenches with the techniques and the tactics, just doing the detailed small things. But a little bigger than that, what we call the at operations, that's almost like a team or a business unit. That could be your marketing or sales. There's many tacticians within that, but it's one level higher. But the highest level is strategy, and that's the incorporation of all those teams, those operational teams with the multitude of tactics. But what I have found that so much leadership development today, it's so tactically focused. Yeah. I know of a company out here, $100 million company, who just finished a program. And do you know what the major learning lesson was? How to write email.
Oh, come on.
No, I'm not exaggerating. How to write an email, because that's communication.
That's scary.
It's so tactical now. And you and I have talked about emotional intelligence. Again, these are tactics and techniques. But what's the larger picture? Those are elements of communication. But what communication is? That's converting knowledge into words. Well, how do you know you have the right message? Thinking. How do you put that into a physical thing, a plan? How do you plan? How do you execute that plan? So there's so much a bigger curriculum out there. And I just find that it's so tactically oriented that I'm bewildered. I really am.
Yeah, that's scary too. And if you go back to simple concepts, some leadership 101 concepts that are enduring, right? It doesn't matter where in life you are, but you should always be leading one level up from where you're at right now. So if you're leading one level up from where you're at, you should always try to be that. You're telling me this organization that you know of where you live is teaching people to do emails? Just think about that. No one's leading up at all, because if you're just learning how to do an email, you obviously are tactical and you obviously are at the lowest level possible. What value is that creating for your organization? It's crazy.
It's funny. It's sloppy thinking, because when they hear emails, they're hearing effective communication. Well, ineffective communication can cost you, I think, up to 65% of the resources for a project. So they're making the numbers there, but not realizing that is one sliver.
That's right.
And I've said today, look, I love technology. We live in such an educated culture. I mean, my God, Jim, you could go right now to ASU and probably get a PhD and find and how many feathers Napoleon had in his hat. You know what I mean? But
Right.
who gives a shit? Who cares?
Right. That's
Right.
right. Yeah.
And so this is, again, I think one of the big challenges with leadership development is, look, leadership is incredibly important, but you know what? As you and I have said, we in the military, we had a thing called command. You can never use that, but what is command? It's the integration of management, information, leadership all together. So in a sense, if I'm asking you to study the human beings, I would not give you 9/10 of your curriculum about the human arm. It's the whole. So I think
That's right.
leadership in itself has to be managed with strategy, with management, with planning, all these things, which seem separate, but they're not.
That's right. I'll tell you, Kevin, your use of the example about communications is great about this topic right now, because you could just say it's about an email and it's communication, so we're going to teach everybody how to do email first, so at least we're on this foundational level of communications. But what they're missing, these other missing parts that you're kind of inferring to, is like, where is the person that's saying 2 years from now email will not matter, and for us to communicate it is in Zoom, let's just say, and all that stuff? Where is the person that is trained to have this outward thinking process, this critical thinking process, this dreaming, the agility to say, if communications is a problem with us, are we even on the right platform? Instead of teaching people how to do emails, should they not have said, what's the right platform for us in what we do, however we normally communicate, at what pace works best for us? That's connecting the parts truly to what leadership is in a turn in, for something about like communications.
No, totally agree. And you bring up a point. This is a now I know the Army, I'm sure the military has talked about this. I heard it from author Tom Ricks once, but he was talking about, in terms of leadership, you don't train for leadership, you educate. And it goes specifically to what you just said. You train people for emails because it's a certain environment, there's certainty there, you know what's going to happen. But when you ask bigger picture question, what's going to be happening in the future? That's an education, in a sense that you're developing people for uncertainty, to think on their own. Well, hello.
That's right.
What, as leaders, you're dealing with people, not automatons, and people have feelings, emotions, emotional responses. They're not going to react every way you think they are. So you have to develop them to think on their own in the uncertainty and the fog of war. And you get that through a real education. I think today, most leadership training is exactly it. It's training for the here and now, and not the uncertainty, which we know is coming.
Yeah, great. No, it's a good point. And I will tell you, wouldn't any organization want force multipliers, right? Wouldn't you want, if you had 100 people in your organization, you don't want to think of it so hierarchical that, yeah, I've got 100 people, but they do certain tasks at certain times for certain reasons. Okay, you're only going to go so far. But if you unleash that army of 100, that the newest employee that you may have considered to be at the bottom of the hierarchy is just as empowered to come up with a new idea, to be empowered to say, hey, boss, I think we're doing this wrong because all of those things, that's where we need to be. We need to be to where you unleash the power of everybody, because in today's world, at the end of the day, Kevin, everybody does have an answer. All you got to do is Google it, right? You Google up the problem, how to communicate better. There's all your answers. That's kind of beside the point. You want these people put in the context of what's best for the mission of that organization. And you've got a whole army of thinkers out there to do that.
So I have a question for you. I have an observation, and I'd like to maybe get some comment. You don't have to comment on this if you want, but one thing I have noticed with a lot of leadership development today, especially content, curriculum, it comes in the form of books. A lot comes through LinkedIn. I just see all these thought leaders. But years ago, Jim, I read an article about leadership books and leadership development. And I think there was a study that said, some of the most popular leadership books out there, like 80% of the book had nothing to do with leadership. It's usually political or religious. They're smuggling in certain political ideologies or religions. It's not leadership is the vessel for the actual ideology or the religion. And I've seen a lot of leadership material today that it looks more like it's advocacy than it is the art and science of leading people. Have you seen that too?
Yeah, it's I have actually, I haven't reflected much on it, but the realities are that what you say is true. And you always have to be careful. I mean, this is the problem, right? Like I, I'm naive in some things, meaning I love the art and science of leadership. I think it's very true at the very end, right? It's a very true thing to do and all of that. I love the simplicity of it and the complexity of it and all of those kind of things. I love it. The problem is there's so many people trying to put their own slant on it, their own version of it to fit it into the marketing message to get them to sell 1 million books, right? Or they're only writing this leadership book so that they can get on stage and do a TEDx speech,
Yes.
or to say for $9.99, come listen to me at the Holiday Inn and I'll teach you how to write emails more effectively, that kind of thing. It's not for the pure joy and realities of art and science of leadership. So yeah, I think we got to be very careful about it. And I will tell you this too, most leadership books that are out there, the minute they're written, almost become outdated, because what you have to remember too is there are a lot of the art of leading. So there are some fundamentals. There are some fundamentals to leadership that have lasted since the beginning of time. You betcha. And I'm a huge believer of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But leadership is also like technology, as it's always changing. It's always needs to be adaptable. It's always got to be agile, all of those kind of things. So you got to be real careful about saying, leadership principle number 62 is this. Well, maybe 10 years ago it was, but it doesn't even exist today. Those kind of things.
No, I totally agree. And there's a great quote by Clausewitz, who's the West philosopher of war. I did a whole series on Clausewitz because everyone, I remember back in the 80s, everyone loved Sun Tzu. Every executive quotes Sun Tzu, but now a lot of people don't know Clausewitz. But Clausewitz has this quote in a sense that um, although war's forms may change, its spirit is everlasting. And in a sense, leadership, there are some everlasting core fundamentals. You may change that. You may have technology, emails, all these things, and they could affect. But what are the core elements? And I would tell you. Well, I would tell you, but one thing I have found that I think to have a successful leadership program, definitions. What are we talking about here? We talking about an influencer, like a LinkedIn influencer or an author, someone who just influenced you to do something, or we're talking about someone who can drive that mission with certain metrics of success and to make sure that the team is developing and being taken care of, that they can replicate that success. I haven't seen a lot of those definitions, at least in my experiences. Have you?
No, man, talk about, I'm going to take notes at whatever point this is in the podcast here, Kevin, because I will tell you that's a fantastic point. It really is, right? Be careful of the words that you use, especially. So here's the thing. Let's just call it like it is. For you and I, we're pretty experienced in life right now. We're a little older. And so if we were to talk about leadership influence, right, and the art of influence and how you influence others, we have that in a certain frame of what we're thinking. But if you're talking to a 25-year-old and we're talking about how to influence they're probably thinking different types of influence, right? Influencers and all of those things. It's a pretty valid point about be very careful of the words that you use. And from a curriculum point of view, or as all of these programs are built, we have to look at the definitions on what it really is. And influence is a spectacular example of that.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I think of Twitter, I know of Twitter. I've been on Twitter, but when I think of influencers, I see all these YouTube guys playing their games. I'm like, really? He's got 2 million followers. He's an influencer. Like, what's he talking about? Anyway, that's my old man coming out.
That's right. That's right. But it is amazing. But the other thing though, too, is if you flip it and we go back to communications or anything, and like one of the fundamentals of being a fantastic leader, a good leader, the ability to influence your people is the ability to communicate, right? I mean, communications is one of those fundamentals. The definition of communications has changed, right? Because now you have all these different channels in which to do that. And, it is something that you have to address. It's this really interesting thing. And I guess if people are tuning in for this and they're saying, well, this is a discussion about leadership development programs, and, I'm trying to shop around for leadership development programs or even think about them, just think about that as an example, because, this is a good thing. Like, you have to teach the fundamentals of communications, what that means from a leader's perspective. But there should be programs out there to say, how do you effectively communicate in what channels for the type of, audience that you want? I think they're both things that should be included in a curriculum of today's world.
Absolutely. And notice too, again, going back to that, even though it's the fundamentals of the pillars of mission and people and leadership, when you say influence, if I am very people oriented, you know what I'm hearing? Persuasion. But guess what? If my docket, I don't know why I use these legal terms, my docket, if I have a stack of tasks and things to do, I don't have time to persuade you, Jim. You and I have developed trust. And if I say something, I expect you to do it. That, for a mission-oriented person, mission-oriented like myself and you, that's normal. But for people-oriented behaviors, you'll find that no, they expect persuasion. So that's why when you say influence, what does that mean? That means creating the conditions that when you say something, it will be done based on your intent without you having to supervise or even prod to go above and beyond. So again, definitions matter, that real clarity, because once you have that kind of clarity, look, if you're a startup in a brand new industry and you want you got to grab a market space. You want speed. You want people to have that initiative. But if you're in a larger, mature organization, rules matter, regulations matter. So your version of influence may differ, but the onus is on people who are running these programs, designing these programs. What does your company need? How fast are you going? What's the risk? And how do we design this? How do we develop the leaders that you need? It takes some real insight.
It does. It's interesting too. That I think when you were talking, one of the things that was going through my head is a lot of all of this still comes down to trust. Because in order for you to set the conditions on every example that you just gave, when there's no trust, it's just not going to happen. And you get a lot of these leadership development programs now that are boxed in by all the political correct things that are out there. There are some laws that you have to adhere by, right? And then there's sensitivities and all of those different things. But when you frame it in there, and you have to teach it in those ways, if they're telling us that we have to be taught those ways, at the end of the day, even if it's that contained and it's safe, it's a big safe space because all the boxes are checked on political correctness. If you don't have trust, it still won't happen.
Totally agree. And let me throw a little nuance to trust. Trust, again, a very important word, but you got to put a little nuance to this. Again, I know you use different behavioral tools. I'll use some of my terminology, but for high dominance like myself, I trust you, Jim, if you can win. And guess what? You'll take casualties. That's fine, but win. I expect success. If you're highly extroverted, guess what trust is? Everyone's happy. Everyone feels included. If you're a high conformist, Jim, trust is about you delivering 100% accuracy, not 99. If you can't deliver quality, I can't trust you. So even the different behaviors have different levels of success.
And I would put all those in one box of saying earned trust. It's earned by different ways by the type of different personalities, but it's earned trust. And so I earn it differently by a conformist. I earn it differently with a dominance and all of those kind of things, but it's earned. And once you earn that trust, that's what you have to do, right? You got to learn that earned trust gets you to that certain level. The earning of it is viewed through different lenses and stuff.
Yeah. Man, this has been a great conversation.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. It's time flies by when you have two people in the room that are just talking about what they're passionate about. That's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. So before we end this, how can people find you? Who are you looking for? Who can you bet? Who's your customer? Who can you, how can you best serve them? How can they contact you?
Yeah, well, I'm sure in the show notes, we're going to embed like my contact information for sure. The easiest way is reaching out on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit, and I make sure that all my content is posted on LinkedIn. So if you just look for Jim Hotaling, on LinkedIn. That's how you find me more than anything else. And the type of person that I would say is that, would benefit the most out of this is in any level of leadership. The two extremes are actually the best. The C-suite executive would learn the most out of this because maybe they've been walking around in this unconscious state for years now, thinking that they are leaders and that they don't need to have anything kind of reimagined about themselves. I challenge that thinking all the time. And then on the other scale, someone that is just starting out, that is their first time that they're leading something, their first frontline managers or anything like that. These are the kind of content that you go and you look and listen to podcasts like this, Kevin, to inspire you to see what right looks like and to just start to gauge what is this whole thing about art and science and leadership and those kind of things. And at the end, I would say this, this is a very biased statement, but most of what I do is coaching. And I think every single person needs a coach. There's a huge difference between mentorship and coaching. Yes. I'm not going to tell you how to do your job. I am going to help you get out of your own way so that you can do it better.
Oh, I love it.
And you do that through coaching. So
totally
that's how
agree.
You find me, and that's the stuff that I do.
Oh, that's great. And a little bit about, can you tell the audience just a little bit about Into Growth?
Yeah, Into Growth. What a fantastic organization I belong to. It's a professional services firm. So it grew out of a coaching firm. So Mike Myatt, our founder and chairman, he's known as one of the top 50 CEO coaches in the world. And by having kind of that bona fides and that aura and persona as the foundation of our firm, we grew to be really good in talent acquisition, so executive search. We go out there and find the best people through the lens of leadership to do the best job for organizations. And then on the other side, we make sure that when those people have landed, that they are assessed correctly and that they're coached correctly. And then it just creates this beautiful kind of, formation of finding the right talent, getting them in there, making sure that they stick in the organization, perform well as leaders, they're coached well, and then we just keep that cycle going.
Oh, that's great. So before we go, any book or movie recommendations, anything out there that people should just watch, enjoy, or read that could help them?
Wow.
I know. I totally threw audience. He did not know I'm throwing that on him. So I apologize. Putting you on the spot. Anything top of your head?
Well, I'll tell you this. One of, we always talked about, are books stuck in time or not? And are they trying to do certain marketing compared to, do they have some validity? So there's a John Maxwell book, and you can argue the fact that there's a lot of marketing to John Maxwell. That's why he's become so famous. So we get that part. But one of the ones that I would always say I still pull off the shelf today to reflect upon, and something I give definitely to all new leaders, is John Maxwell's 360-degree leadership. And the reason why I think the 360-degree leadership book is so well written is because it breaks down all these barriers to say, like, I've made it, now I'm a senior leader, so I don't have to worry about anything. And when you're a new person, you're like, my voice doesn't matter. This book basically says no matter where you are in the organization, your ideas count, they matter, and they can be influenced. Back to your word about influence. You can be an influencer at any place where you are. And I just love that. I love the ish of it. By reading a book like that, you become empowered. So I always say that's a great book. If somebody says, which one do you read? I still pull that off the shelf every once in a while, just to remind me that it's a continuous journey.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So for the audience, I picked up a book. I had to share this. I don't know if you've read this. It's called The Final Cut. No. Final Cut. Art, Money, and Ego in the Making of Heaven's Gate, the film that sank United Artists. 1980, I think, was it Chris Christopherson and Christopher Walken? This movie, which was so expensive, and they gave the director carte blanche. So I like reading about leadership and management and even money together. And there's nothing better than reading about a huge disaster that's right in front of our faces.
So you learn the most.
Yeah. The Final Cut and Leadership 360 by Maxwell. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
360-degree leadership by Maxwell.
Excuse me. 360-degree leadership by Maxwell. Okay.
Awesome.
Awesome. Wait, well, thank you so much, Jim. This has been a great conversation. I knew it was going to be, but I'm really, really happy with it. Thank you for coming and doing this.
Yeah, you bet, Kevin. I've really enjoyed it. I hope the audience gets something out of this. And, again, one of the things that I would ask anybody that watched this podcast is make sure that they share it. If they get something out of it, make sure that you're showing other people this thing, because that's, again, another great symbol of leadership is passing it along.
Oh, I love it. Great, great stuff. All right. Well, with that, have a great weekend, Jim. Have a great weekend, audience, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Enjoyed it. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you like this content and want to hear other things like it, head on over to the website at blackmarketleadership.com. That's blackmarketleadership.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, and you can even create a free members profile